Next Thursday evening in Winnipeg, two young Israelis will be speaking to the public about their decision to refuse mandatory military service in Israel and the consequences they faced as a result. 21-year-old Einat Gerlitz was sentenced to 87 days in prison in 2022 for her refusal to join the Israeli army. 19-year-old Tal Mitnick says he was the first person to publicly refuse military service in Israel after October 7th, and he served 185 days in military prison. Winnipeg is just one of the 13 Canadian cities they are speaking at as part of what they call their Refusenik Tour. And they join me now. Good morning, Einat.
Good morning.
And good morning, Tal.
Good morning. Thanks for having us on.
Thanks for joining us. So, before we get into each of your stories, can you give us an idea of how military enlistment works in Israel?
Every child, every person, every Jewish citizen of Israel has to enlist to the military after finishing high school. It's like you guys have college here after finishing high school, and we have the military. And tests for the military start already in 11th grade to see what positions are best for you. So it's really taken as this like very normal thing. Like it's not thought about as a decision to join the military. It's just something that everyone does.
And how long do you have to serve
So
when you
men
turn
are
18?
obligated to serve for 2 years and 8 months, and women are obligated to serve for 2 years.
So, Anna, let's start with your story because you made the decision to refuse this mandatory military service back in 2022. What made you make that decision?
So I think it was a complicated process to get to that decision because it's like Tal said, it's very clear that the military is part of our lives. I have a grandpa who fought in the 67 war and the 73 war. It's very clear that that's what you do after high school. I think during high school, I got involved in activism. After coming out of the closet, finding queer community, getting involved in queer activism, and then in climate activism. I met there for the first time. I had Palestinian friends who were Israeli citizens at 17, and having Palestinian friends at 17 is not a regular thing for an Israeli Jew. Um, and that's where those there's cracks in that narrative really opened up for me. Realizing what oppression they go through, realizing what's behind this big word occupation that didn't mean a lot to me before. And I understood that I can't enlist to the military that oppresses my friends and their families.
So you made this decision to refuse military
Yes.
conscription. What was the reaction that you got?
So there were different reactions. Some people supported me from the beginning. Some people told me that I'm selfish, for choosing not to enlist because it's seen as the years that you're giving back to the country who so-called protects you your whole life. So I was told that choosing not to enlist is selfish. People said that I'm a traitor. I got all kinds of comments. But for me, how I see it, it's the biggest step of taking responsibility for the society that I live in and for making a change and doing something for a better future and not enlisting to be part of the military that enforces the apartheid regime.
You were sent to military prison as a
Yes.
result. How old were you when you were sent to prison?
I was 19. I refused when I once I refused, I was sentenced to military prison. And when you refuse, you don't know if you're gonna go in for 2 weeks or for 2 years, like the ones that sat the most. I ended up sitting 87 days, but there's a big uncertainty factor in the refusal. I was sitting in military prison with other women. I was the only refuser in the women's department at that time.
What was your experience like?
It was tough. It was challenging. It is important to say that we didn't like the military prison that we sat in is not the military prison that Palestinians sit in. It's separate prisons. So it was tough at times, and there's people there who get to really tough mental situations, and the discipline is very, very strict. But knowing that I'm there for the struggle and knowing that that's my way to be part of it and I have a whole network supporting me really gave me the power to continue.
Tal, when you refused military service, it was a slightly different context. It was after October 7th. So you were 18 years old at the time when you made that decision. Two questions. How did October 7th impact you? And why did it cause you to refuse to serve in the Israeli army?
From before October 7th, I was an activist and I knew that I did not want to join the military that occupies my neighbors, that that oppresses the whole Palestinian people. And when October 7th happened, obviously a horrible massacre of killing civilians and kidnapping civilians, a lot of people asked me from my society, well, didn't this change your opinion? Didn't this make you sober up to the reality? And I remember actually media outlets that interviewed me before October 7th, they called me and they asked if I knew anyone that used to be a leftist and now is a right-wing person. I don't think it changed my mind at all. I think October 7th only strengthened my opinion. From For years, anti-Zionist and leftist activists have been crying out that siege, apartheid, and occupation will only blow up in our faces. And that's exactly what happened on October 7th. The siege blew up in our face. I believe that going forward, we need to that this is what I said that more revenge and continuing the cycle of violence is not only not gonna complete the objectives of the war, which is supposed to be bringing the hostages back and uh, taking down Hamas, but these are not objectives that can be achieved by military force. Obviously, the hostages were released in a hostage deal, and Hamas is still, like we've heard, has more militants than it had than before October 7th. Uh, After 17 months of war and genocide, we have not achieved the objectives of the war. And this is why I refused. I refused because I refused to the notion that military pressure, that military action can achieve anything that we want. And also to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people that are still undergoing a genocide in the Gaza Strip.
The charge that Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza is before the International Court of Justice. Israel denies that charge. You both use the word apartheid. There are human rights organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, even Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem, who have said that the legal definition of apartheid under the Apartheid Convention has been met when it comes to the treatment of Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. How typical is, your opinion that there is apartheid going on amongst Israelis?
It's not typical at all, and I think we don't even need to go as far as the term apartheid. Using the term occupation is debatable in the Israeli public. It's seen as like even saying that there is an occupation, illegal occupation is something that's seen as a radical thing to say. So apartheid is a few steps ahead of that, recognizing that there is this inequality and this oppressive regime of the Palestinian people is not an accepted fact by the mainstream.
Refusing military service could be perceived as unpatriotic, especially during a time of war. I would love to hear from you what your personal relationship is with Israel. Like, Einat, you're third generation Israeli. Tell me a little bit about your connection to your country.
I feel like I would like to say more connection to the society than the country. That's how I see it more. I am Israeli. It's my culture, it's my history, it's my family, it's my friends, it's where I live and it's my home. And of course I feel very isolated from it at times. And it can be very challenging. And it can be very tough. And I think that my refusal, especially being public about it, is because I care about this society. I care about my home, and I want things to change, and I feel like I do have the power to be part of that change. And I want to use my voice and my privilege that I have a supportive family, even though we don't agree on everything. At the end of the day, they support me, and that's the biggest privilege. and it's important for me to use it for the better. And I really care about this place and the people who live in the land between the river and the sea. And I think like no one's going anywhere. The Israelis aren't going anywhere. The Palestinians aren't going anywhere. And I want to be part of the fight for something better and not part of the destruction.
Tal, what about you? What's your connection to Israel?
It's where I grew up. It's where I've only known Israel as my home. Um, Although I do not connect with the state or the apartheid regime or the Jewish supremacy, I do believe that I have a very warm place in my heart for the people that live here. And that means Jews, Palestinians, anyone else living here. And it really makes me sad to see how much destruction and how much killing and how much loss has been done in the name of my security, in the name of my society. And this is what makes us fight, because we will say that it's not in our name. We do not believe that this will bring us security.
How typical are your perspectives amongst youth in Israel right now?
If in Canada, or as we've heard in Canada or the United States, every younger generation is more progressive than the older one, then in Israel it's exactly the opposite. Polling around young people, you see high percentages of Ben Gvir supporters, of Netanyahu supporters, and the kind of left Zionists it's kind of a dying breed. There's not really any of them. And I think that there was this saying after October 7th that the conception was broken by the right. The right said this, that the conception that we can live with the Palestinians and that we can live side by side in peace, that was broken. But there was another conception broken. The conception that you can live with an occupation and you can live with a siege without thinking about it, without feeling it, and everything will be okay. And I think after October 7th, the position of maintaining the occupation, of just living with it, living with the status quo, I think that position totally died. And from there we have two options. Either the rights option of we have to transfer, we have to kill, we have to murder everyone, which obviously is not possible, is not practical, nothing
And it's terrible.
isn't and is morally
Yeah.
reprehensible. Or we have the left, the anti-Zionist perspective of the only option left is to live together and take apart the systems that create the privileges that we have between the river and the sea.
Einat, you said earlier that, at 17 you had Palestinian friends and that was unusual. Like, how much of a difference did it make to have friends who are Palestinian to your outlook on life?
It makes a very big difference, just from the basic thing that the stories that my grandparents told me are not the stories that their grandparents told them. It's hearing the word Nakba for the first time, realizing that there's not like realizing that also in the 48 borders, we're not in the same, we don't have the same rights and we're not in the same situation. Um, Realizing that there are things that I can say out loud in protests, on the media, on social media, and they can't let themselves say that because they're going to face circumstances that I would never face. I that was it really changed my perspective, and I think it was in this environment of climate activism where I was starting to see the intersectionality of the struggles, that everything is connected and the systems that oppress us are the same, and seeing the connections between the queer struggle and the climate struggle and the human rights struggle and the specifically the Palestinian struggle. That was very big, and I think it also shakes basic parts of your identity as an Israeli Jew. Like growing up, we're told a very, very specific narrative that we're always being attacked and that we have to have a Jewish state for our security, and that we can't possibly let the Palestine, like quote unquote, let the Palestinians have more rights or have independence, because it's gonna risk the Israelis. And I don't think that there's security now that's at risk, where like there hasn't been any security. It's a false narrative. And realizing that the struggle for human rights is, it's all connected. And I think once you see the social injustices and once you fight for them, it should be for everyone. As a queer person, I understand, like I'm not just fighting for my rights as an Israeli Jew queer woman, but also for my trans friends, for Palestinian queers. We're all in this together. And I think understanding that we're all in this together was what led me to refuse.
Tal, what backlash did you face when you publicly refused to serve after October 7th?
Because I was the first public conscientious objector, my story blew up, also in the world, but also inside of Israel. Um, I got death threats. I got called a traitor. My address got leaked. My phone number got leaked. People recognize me on the street, sometimes for good, most times for not. Um, and I was personally targeted by the head of the enlistment center, who gave a direct order down to not release me, to not um, give me an exemption.
And you ended up spending 185 days in military
Yes,
prison. How did that change you?
I think while it was a really tough experience, I do not regret the decision that I made. I think refusing is the best decision that I've ever made. And actually, also inside of prison, I had some experiences that I would not give up. I think learning about, like learning more broadly about Israeli society from inside prison, because the people that get inside prison are people from the lowest socioeconomic classes that we have in the Israeli society, and people that living in Tel Aviv my whole life, being so privileged, I would never have met and I would never have spoken to. So making those connections, and just to be clear, they don't agree with me on almost anything, but making those connections on a human level, that's really it. Really, I would not give up talking to these people and understanding them on a broader basis.
You're both in Canada, speaking across the country. You'll be in Winnipeg next Thursday. What's your message to Canadians? Why come here?
We believe that the struggle and the fight against the genocide, the occupation, the apartheid is a fight that needs to be from within and at the same time from without. Our role is to fight from within. That's where we have the most power inside our own society. And when we come to Canada, we want to spread the message that Canadians also have power, and Canada is also complicit in this genocide. And without Canadian, European, and American weapons, this genocide would not have been possible. And Canadians need to pressure their government to stop selling arms to Israel, to divest from Israeli-made products, and to culturally boycott Israel on the international level. This is the only way that we can stop what's happening in Palestine, in Gaza. The only way is to make Israel feel what it means to be a society committing genocide, and to make Israeli citizens to interrupt the day-to-day life that is so, so comfortable, while hundreds of thousands of people, millions are refugees, tens of thousands dead. I can't stress enough how regular the lives are from inside Israel. And that really makes my blood boil.
It's a strong message. What reaction have you had from Canadians? And I'm curious about Canadian Jews and Palestinians and in general.
So the events that we've had until now were very successful. We had really interesting discussions with the people that came to the events. People were very excited to hear our stories. It gives us a lot of strength to see how much solidarity there is overseas. There also have been people who don't like there have been some intrigues, but think people who did show up to the events are people that some of them have the same views as ours, some of them not necessarily, but their hearts are open to hear our stories. And it's amazing to see how many hearts are open to hear our stories and to have those tough discussions. And I would like, if it's okay, to use this platform also to share that in a few days on March 19th, there's going to be a new refuser, Ella Keidar Greenberg. She's 18 years old. She's a very brave trans woman that is going to publicly refuse, the first trans woman to publicly refuse. And we don't know what's going to happen on March 19th. We don't know if she's going to send to women's prison, to men's prison. We don't know in what conditions she's going to be held and what sentence she is going to receive. And we want to encourage everyone to like follow her story and share it. And we're living in a very fascist under a very fascist government, and things are becoming more and more fascist every day that goes by. And we need your support. We need the international support.
And you mentioned this kind of event coming up. Tell me more about your work with the Masarvot network that you're both part
So
of.
Misarvot means refusers in the feminine conjugation in Hebrew. It's a network that supports refusers, Israeli refusers. Um, what we do is we provide legal assistance with it, which is crucial for the refusal process. I don't know what would we have done without it. So both legal assistance and, of course, a social network which is so important in this tough process. We have refusers coming from different backgrounds, different families, receiving different kinds of comments, and having a social network of past refusers supporting current and future ones it means the world.
And just finally, for both of you, what is your dream for the future between Palestinians and Israelis?
It's hard to see a future. Um, we're living in really dark times where I look and it's really hard to imagine, um, as I've said, that every young Israeli is more fascist than his parent. But I do see a time and place where the international community starts actually pressuring Israel into change. And there will be this block, not of human rights and not of liberation of Palestinians inside Israeli society. There will be this block of practicality, of practically, I would rather have peace with the UAE and maintain our international relationships with Europe, with North America, than the other way around. And that's what kind of holds me hoping that one day that will happen. And after that, we can both heal our societies from the wounds of war. And after we heal, then the society is bound to change. There's no other way around it.
And the dream is human rights for everyone between the river and the sea, and having freedom and liberation for all of us, and not having one nation's security and privilege and rights on top of the other, but having everyone having the same human rights, but seems very far away.
Tal, you said something and I just wanted to ask you about it. You said this comment, every Israeli is more fascist than their parent. When you make a comment like that, do you worry that it will feed into anti-Semitism, which we're always also seeing an increase in?
I think anti-Semitism is a very important issue to talk about. And from what we've heard from Jewish communities here, they've faced a lot of anti-Semitism, both from the right, but also sometimes, sadly, from inside their movements on the left. I obviously I was making a generalization. It's not true about every Israeli. Um, but the again, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism being against Israeli policy are two different things. And what's even more anti-Semitism is telling Jews what they can and what they can't think in accordance to the state of Israel and testing Jews if they're really Jewish, then they should support this and this and this. And that's the real anti-Semitism.
It's very important, I think, coming to Canada, and it's very important. Like we need your help in standing on the differences between anti-Semitism and criticizing Israel. I think there's a lot of room, and it's important to criticize Israel. Obviously, that's what we do also in order to create change and to be part of the Palestinian struggle. But it's also very important to fight anti-Semitism and to make sure that it's tackled and standing on those differences and not letting people blend them is very important.
What gives you both hope?
I think having more and more like having new refusers like Ella gives me a lot of hope or courage, gives me a lot of hope.
I'm also
Tal?
very close friends with Ella, and she also gives me hope. And also, um, seeing that people can change their minds. I think seeing the processes people from my family, people from friends have gone through. And I'm not saying that I expect all Israelis to change their minds, but seeing how much we can influence our own surroundings and our own people, and knowing that my refusal did make a change, at least with some people, that they saw my refusal, maybe were on the fence, and then that's what made them decide that they should not join the military. And that's what gives me hope.
Einat, you mentioned that it's really important to make a distinction between anti-Semitism and criticism of Israeli policy. How do you feel when you hear someone say that criticism of Israel or disagreeing with Israel is anti-Semitism?
I think that just shows how much the Israeli Hasbara is working. Um, it's very devastating to hear because I think that fighting for human rights and fighting against oppression is very, very important. And if someone like and I think that it's just sad to see, and I think it's very not just sad, it's very frightening to see how those two are blended, anti-Semitism and criticizing Israel, because it's not the same thing. And I think it's very, and unfortunately, anti-Semitism is a problem that we all live in and we all feel it until today. It's not something that faded away from the world, and it's something that's very, very important to fight. And I think that criticizing Israel and fighting against the Israeli apartheid and fighting against the genocide is also very important, and being part of the struggle and like being allies of the Palestinian struggle and being part of the struggle to change Israeli society is very, very important. And I think that's where we need the international community and especially critical Jews around the world to stand on those differences between anti-Semitism and criticizing Israel.
You're going to have to
Jewish
give,
values,
I was going
sorry,
to say, you're going to have to go ahead, Tal.
Jewish values and people of Jewish descent have throughout history been on the front of struggling for human rights. If it's in South Africa, if it's in the civil rights in the United States,
If it's for
and
workers' rights everywhere.
it's sad to see that on this issue, it's not coming to fruition.
Einat, Tal, thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having us.